My surprise talk is going to be the story of ReScript's documentation platform. More on that reason and ReScript thing later, because this is actually quite relevant for the core of this talk. It will be a very, very different kind of talk. Probably not even the one I would have expected, to be honest, but let's see. So first of all, we're going to talk about ReScripts just to establish some context, because probably, I don't know, 70% of all the folks watching this stream have never heard about it, most likely, or maybe just in a tweet or something. Give a little bit of context on the history, what the challenges were back then on the documentation, and how we took this like technical debt or community debt or legacy thing and formed a new documentation platform out of that with some technical details, some how we did analytics, metrics, and so on, and also a few things not as detailed as the previous speakers did about like technical writing, content creation, and stuff like that. This was like a magnificent talk about React Native. I could not imagine like managing a project like this, but we also had our burden to handle here, and also a little bit about community, because community is very important also for documentation as well. Also to give you some more context, so I'm working for a company that uses ReScript in its product, and the product is actually quite old. It's a few years old. Like the code base itself, it's written in Flow and JavaScript, and we are partially integrating ReScript in there to slowly migrate it over to ReScript. We think it's a great technology, and it's definitely something worth looking at if you're interested in this kind of stuff. So what is it? So this is like the elevator pitch, so to say, just to give you some context. ReScript is a robustly typed language that compiles to efficient and human-readable JavaScript. It comes with a lightning-fast compiler tool chain that scales to any code base size. So this is a lot of like marketing text here. So we try to split it up a little bit. When we talk about a robustly typed language, what we mean is that we are having a language that at any point in time has always 100% type coverage. It's not as you would expect with languages like, I don't know, TypeScript or Flow, where you have a gradual type system that would introduce certain unnicecities, for instance, to be able to map to JavaScript, because, for instance, TypeScript tries to cover the whole JavaScript spec. It needs to introduce concepts like anytypes. And anytypes and stuff like that kind of bleeds through your whole code base and makes the code a little bit less reliable. This is a trade-off in the whole language to be able to use JavaScript as is. And ReScript is a little bit more of its own language, but it kind of looks like JavaScript, and it compiles to human-readable JavaScript. So we don't try to be JavaScript, but we are kind of like making it easier for JavaScript developers to understand it and read it. And the more important aspect here, which might be relevant for one or two persons here in the stream, it comes with a lightning-fast compiler toolchain, which means the type checker, the build system, like the compiler itself that compiles the code, the code emitting, everything of this stuff is lightning fast in a millisecond range per file. Which means if you have a code base of 1,000 files, it would just take a couple of seconds longer to do a clean build than when you have like just 100 files. It doesn't matter. It really scales with the requirements. As far as I know, and that's why I'm interested in this stuff, whenever I've been working on like more ambitious projects in TypeScript, it oftentimes ended up in like a lot of caching and a lot of extra architecture to be able to handle huge compilation, like huge project compilations. And this is not fun, waiting for the compiler to succeed and then suddenly like running into invalid caches in VS Code is just not fun at all. And ReScript tries to mitigate that by having a design that's fast and performant by design. So there's also like a search on the JavaScript side where people start getting invested in Rust and use, I don't know, like rebuild Webpack in like a native compiler or whatever. You can imagine ReScript being like a type checker compiler, like the whole tool chain, like in one thing, as fast as SVC or what was it? Now I can't remember the tool which is like replacing Webpack or doing the same thing. Anyways, it's fast. Here's a small example. I will not go too much into the syntax, but the idea is that you can see that, okay, we have like a switch, we have like a let to assign a variable, we have JSX built into the language, so it's also optimized for React usage, and it kind of compiles. If you look at the right side, you can see that this is actually, yeah, this looks like a React component. It's a function, it takes some props, it has like a props.count, and creates an element which is like the desugared JSX, so we don't need any bubble or whatever in between. So this is actually quite nice. It's like one npm install away. You can integrate it in any existing code base and then just happily create one, I don't know, one React component and integrate it in your code base. Some other features in this feature set. So there is a focus on functions, values, and pipe operations. So there are no classes in, like there's no concept of classes in ReScript, which is actually great, because if you have been like looking at utility libraries like Lodash or Ramda or whatever, they usually come with a pipe function to pipe together, to chain together multiple like transformations if you map over data or reduce over data and do some stuff. And in ReScript, this is like a first class thing. You don't need a separate library just to do this kind of thing. And another good thing about detaching values and functionality that transform these values is that it's way easier to actually tree shake stuff. If you think about certain libraries like Moment.js is using a lot of like class-like structures where they involve the whole thing in one bundle. And this is not very easy to tree shape, because they need to ship everything, because the state and the methods and the data is all coupled in one class. So we don't do that. So it's just kind of feels kind of like a subset of JavaScript, but also adding a few features which are nice. We have immutable record types, for instance. If you're familiar with immutable.js or with Immer, the problem there is that if you use an immutable.js library, it involves certain runtime. So you need to convert back and forth between immutable data structures. If you have been using this in React, this has also probably be a pain on memory pressure, because they create a lot of like in-memory data, which the runtime needs to keep track of. And here we don't have that. We just have like, we compile it to JavaScript objects, but we enforce the immutability on the type checker level. We have variance and pattern matching, which is extremely useful for UI development. So if you're doing like very complex state transitions and you have like disabled buttons, and then you have like a few requests there, and you have like loading screens and loading components everywhere, variants are an incredible tool to basically design your component state before you even write any code, just expressing them as types. You can also imagine them as a linear version of a tagged union in TypeScript. They are pretty darn useful for refactoring as well. When you're like adding a new variant and a new case, like a new UI state, and then the compiler will guide you through the whole code base where you're missing out on this pattern match. And the pattern match looks like a switch in our case. Anyways, there's like an extra feature there. Plain ReScript code doesn't have any concept of null and undefined, because we have variants. We usually express them as an optional, kind of like in Rust. They also have like options. And so basically we remove a whole category of checking null and undefined, or null and undefined, which is really, really nice on the readability of the code. We have to build in JSX support, what I said before, and it's very easy to integrate in existing JavaScript, TypeScript code bases. We even have like functionality to generate TypeScript types from ReScript code, which is usually easier than the other way around. Because we don't have any types and such, it's a little harder to go the other way around. We cannot really generate types from TypeScript to ReScript though. Our target group is also very important, because if you're writing documentation, you always need to be sure whom are you designing this for. And on the language level, it's even more important because otherwise you don't have any goals to achieve, right? If you don't know who you're making this language for, why bother? So what we are trying to do is we try to build a language for React developers, for JavaScript developers. We're trying to build a complex UI that is later easy to adapt and refactor at any scale. And this is not only fluff. Like from my experience, my personal experience, of course, it was always very, very easy to adapt code that has been like more than 1.5 years old. Never had a problem trying to figure out what I did. There was never a problem figuring out what types were involved, and also like the way how you edit code is a little different because you don't have any import statements and stuff like that. So you don't have to wrangle like with the import paths and stuff like that. So it's kind of a nice experience if you can just create a file and just use that component as if it would be globally available. And other target groups are, as I mentioned before, Flow and TypeScript users that are kind of fatigued by this unreliable JS types with slow compilation types, type checking, stale caches and such. If you have been working on a huge TypeScript code base and you needed to check out a new branch, and then you had to wait like 5 to 6 minutes just to rebuild the whole thing, otherwise VS Code showing the wrong things. Yeah, this is something ReScript tries to solve. Or for other people like me, I'm getting kind of fatigued by this very, very complex type definitions TypeScript allows, because it has a lot of magic types and it needs that to map to the JavaScript world. But sometimes you're just looking for a simpler language that still works with JS, and you don't want to worry too much about like type acrobatics and stuff. Okay, so this is like the broader context. I hope it's not too much, but let's talk about its history. Now it's getting really messy because this sounds very lean, right? So what I just described is just, this is like it's just a few sentences, one mission, and this is what we try to achieve. But previously it was not that easy. So let's have a look at ReScript's history back then, how it came to be. So 2016, there was a compiler called BakuScript, and there was a syntax called ReasonML, which was developed by Facebook. BakuScript was developed within Bloomberg. And in 2016, they kind of banded together to create a language that is kind of looks like JavaScript, but can compile to different platforms. For instance, to native code like Go or Rust, and also to JavaScript kind of with the BakuScript workflow. And he also added Reason React bindings to kind of, bind to React and cater to this React use case I was talking about. And this went along until 2019. It was like 3 years. I was deeply involved with this. I also organized like 2 conferences in the meantime, until there was like this discussion on what should we focus on, because like this 2 ways, native and kind of JS, and both workflows, they don't really mix together. They are kind of different, and also the communities are kind of different. So we kind of needed to separate these 2 worlds. So in 2020, we introduced the new syntax implementation, which was written completely from scratch, a handwritten parser, which has nice error recovery, which is like super fast, like 10 times faster, and specifically made for BakuScript and the JavaScript use case. And in August, it was like completely rebranded, and we relaunched our new documentation website and rolled out to our users, to our existing users and our new users. This was kind of like the rough bird's eye view. So we had a lot of legacy, and a lot of, you can imagine this was like a migration nightmare. To tell existing users that they are now going to ReScript and it's not Reason anymore, as it's BakuScript. So we had these 3 websites. And as you can see, like the Reason website is like orange, the BakuScript is like purple, Reason React is blue. It was kind of confusing for our users. We saw this over the years, that people are like, oh, what is Reason now? Is it like the syntax, or is it like the whole language, or is what is BakuScript in that equation? How does this work? And where do I find this information if I want to just use JavaScript? And this was indeed very confusing also for myself. we wanted to improve that during the rebrand. We wanted to make like one picture out of it. We wanted to we wanted the docs to reflect our language philosophy, so to say. We wanted to be simple, we wanted to be lean, we wanted to be cool. That's important. So there are a few steps involved to achieve this goal, and hopefully maybe someone can pick some notes or some details out of it and use it themselves. I'm not sure. You can also ask me questions later if you want. So that very first step, we wanted to involve a designer beforehand, like a proper UI UX designer. And I was happy to have my wife supporting us in that regard. She has a tremendous eye for design in that regard, how to do the layout, how to put the focus on certain content, how to organize the sitemap and stuff like that. So we try to establish a design and implementation process similar like in a normal company, a normal project. Also, just in an OSS setup, we do this on Figma, and we also make it public as much as we can. And we created a single Next.js project. We started out, we had like 3 different Docusaurus pages. All of them were kind of on a different version and all of them in a different state and different quality. And this was kind of jarring because there were 2 teams and some of them, or like one person of one team, was working on all 3 projects separately. It was very hard to roll out like platform related changes to the whole documentation landscape. Like if I changed something in the compiler, I needed to update the React docs as well, right? So this was a huge dependency hell there. So we created one single Next.js project. We copied all the markdown files from all the other Docusaurus projects, put them in one folder. We emulated certain functionality we need from Docusaurus. We removed the localization thing, which I'm still trying to figure out how to do right. I mean, localization is probably the hardest problem in this whole thing. But we couldn't use Docusaurus there because we had specific requirements on how we manage our version documentation. We are a platform, we have a language. We need to keep track of syntax changes, the compiler changes, which is like one manual. And we also had to keep track of other resources that are kind of dependent on this. So this was something Docusaurus couldn't do at that time. And that's why we did it that way. And also we wanted to have a nicer integration with like more control on the design with Tailwind CSS and use React and ReScript to actually dog food or use our own tools to build our documentation, which is also a good reference for anyone who tries to dabble into ReScript. When we unified the information, we still kept the compiler and syntax docs separate, and it was still Reason and it was still BuckerScript. So it looked kind of like this. This was called reasonml.org in the beginning, which was an initiative of the organization, or like I founded together with 2 other board members, called the ReScript Association. Back then it was called Reason Association. We also rebranded that. Anyways, we have the language manual and the JavaScript sections, and as you can see, there's still the same structure, and it's still confusing. I mean, it's all on one page now, but it's still like separated knowledge that should belong together, kind of. Okay, so we started to simplify. We drastically condensed the content, so we merged the language and compiler docs as soon as we were sure how to move forward with the ReScript syntax. We created a version toggle to switch to older versions. We added an older document version so that we can still reflect the original Reason docs and BuckerScript docs for our existing users. We don't want to alienate anyone who has been like a production user. We want to make sure that the migration path is almost seamless. And we also did that with automatic migration, so people could just upgrade their Reason code to ReScript in one single command. And then they could use the most modern version of the docs, which were all in ReScript. We had to be very thorough. We had to remove all the wording that mentions Reason or OCaml or anything that could confuse our users, because if you go to a language page and you're like, okay, this language is called ReScript, you should not mention any other programming language. It would just add to the confusion. And it turned out to be like one of the biggest like confusion points. What I have noticed from my personal circle, whenever I talk to people, everyone was like, but is it now OCaml or is it now Reason or what is it? I was like, no, it's ReScript. Everything's ReScript. Everything you see on the page is designed for that. But still, we wanted to make sure that the transition was easy. We added some analytics. This was actually bigger than I anticipated. Like, this was super important. I mean, it sounds weird, but we added simple analytics for tracking traffic from the HTTP side. It's an anonymous tool. You can actually inspect it. If you go to the repo, there's a link to the analytics, so you can check it out yourself. The data is all open, which gave us a really, really good view on how the language develops. We hooked in Ahrefs, which is an SEO tool. They are also, I think, using ReScript on their platform as well, or at least Reason. So kind of a friendly company there. So shout out to Ahrefs for hooking us up with such a great tool. It helps us to keep track of backlinks, referring domains. It's really great because you can see if there's a new blog post referring to your website, you will see it in the summary, and you can also check it out in the UI, as you can see in the screenshot below. This is like a screenshot from Ahrefs. It's really, really great to discover what people are building with your language. We added Algolia search as well, the open source plan. And this one is actually also very useful because it gives you information on what kind of keywords people are looking at. Some are like Googling async await, some are Googling promises, some are inserting the keywords in your search bar on the website. So we know that these topics are important, so we can tackle them more easily. Here's a very interesting graph of our website since the start in August 2020. And you can see that, so first of all, we can ignore these huge spikes over there. These are just because either there was some interesting blog post or something that this piqued a lot of interest. The very huge one in the middle is caused by Hacker News. As soon as something ends up on Hacker News, you can be sure that it's like spiking as hell. And as you can also see, there's like a continuous growth, at least from the first half up to the second. And another interesting aspect here is you can see like this weird down edges on the right side. I'm not even sure if I can, oops, no, I cannot really click on that. But on the right side, you can see the spikes down below. So these are like the weekends. So what I noticed is that these spikes are getting a little deeper, which means that maybe there are more production users that work from Monday to Friday and less people working on weekends or trying it out on weekends. So that's actually a good sign for stability. We also have like CI testing kind of, we kind of test documentation. So what we do is we have two different CI scripts. One that checks internal links in Markdown, which helps us in preventing broken links, which tremendously helped us, like 404 pages, finding 404 pages. Ahrefs would also find that, but this is like too late. Well, if you merge something and there's a broken link in there, it's too late already. We have a script for testing ReScript code snippets in the API docs, which is very useful. So if we have like our API docs right there, I mean, this is like probably the wrong step, but we are now forced to maintain this whole docs manually. So if you have like an example as here you can see some code snippets with is even, square, result. We wanted to make sure that these examples are 100% compilable, because people tend to copy paste your stuff. And if you copy paste stuff and it doesn't work, it's bad. You get a bad experience for your users. So this was very important to us. So we automated it and made sure that nothing breaks. And this was also a very tremendous tool when we migrated over from Reason. We just migrated all the examples. Then we run the check. We saw that everything was green and we were fine. So testing your Markdown is actually quite a useful feature. It's also not very hard because it's just a simple node script working on the AST of the Markdown. or iterating through the markdown elements, basically. All right, so the last part, or one of the last parts, was after we finished up all this cleanup, simplification, optimization, we were setting up redirects from old sites. This is a very, very important aspect. We wanted to make sure that nothing, like no link, was breaking. The original site, bucketscript.github.io and reasonml.github.io, reasonml still exists, it's still its own project, but we had to migrate off our content and make sure that people don't get lost, because they have bookmarks and they want to follow the bookmark and go to the right resource. So we took our time and took days to figure out all the paths, all the URLs, and do an automatic redirect via Docusaurus HTML redirects, or via our Next.js redirects. This was a lot of work. And in the beginning, I was not sure if it's worth it, but it actually pays off because Google is also following those links and will automatically index them correctly and does a proper canonical refer to the right resource. So if you're writing documentation, always make sure to not break your API links, basically. Try to redirect them if possible. For Reason React, we did it a little bit different because for the ways on how this documentation was designed here, we just added a deprecation warning, and we made sure that the deprecation warning looks on brand with what we have on our documentation platform right now, so people really recognize the brand. And this work actually paid off a lot. You could really tell from the analytics that people were referring from these old resources back to the original canonical resource. Yeah, this was a lot of work. And then we did some fine tweaking, some I don't know, like cool things kind of. So I once saw this this tool, but this one guy, I cannot recall the name right now, but he was doing a lookup tool for operators, for JavaScript operators, like the smaller equal sign, greater than equals, and stuff like this, or plus operator. And I thought this was a really good idea. Like you enter something, a keyword, or you're just looking for generic or whatever, and it will tell you the syntax for it. And maybe I will demonstrate it just a little bit. If you go to the docs, we have the syntax lookup right here. And so if I'm looking for generic, for instance, we will see, oh, this is generic, and then I can click on that, and then, oh, this is a type parameter. So I'm reading some code, and I'm like, oh, what is this weird asterisk dot? And you're like, this is the floating point multiplication operator. Wow, okay, now I get it. And then you get some examples with some JavaScript output. You can try it out in the playground. And you're ready to go, and you have a much better time discovering the language. And I think this is such a great tool. I've never seen this for any other programming language, and I'm not sure why. So maybe someone can pick that up, that idea. That's really great. About the technical writing, content, and design. So not going to supersede the first talk here. It's just very bare bone. My most valuable learnings, basically. So most important thing, or my advice to anyone, understand your target group. It's such an obvious thing, but a lot of people are scared to define the target group. Sit down and write down whom you're targeting. Whom is this going to help? Choose a writing style, stick to it is important. Don't just switch around with styles. We chose a very direct style, very short style, because people don't read the documentation. Actually, if you write a blob of text, you can be sure that the most important bits will be missed. We collaborate, but we keep an eye on the full picture. Very important, don't just blindly accept PRs just because they add something. Everything that adds to the documentation should be very carefully scrutinized. Keep it lean. And we treat documentation like an API. As I said, if you introduce a breaking change in a URL, make a redirect. And also, writing documentation is super scary, because if you're writing for a language, you're writing content, you're automatically like an authority in this topic. And not everyone is a specialist and doesn't feel like he or she is a specialist. So it's a matter of, the scariness is good, but you should also make sure to not get too scared, otherwise you will not write any documentation at all. For the community side, there is one interesting aspect. So the community is an important source of information. So what we did is we migrated off a real-time chat and launched a discourse forum. And the forum software has a lot of advantages. First of all, the thread system. It's asynchronous, so everyone can participate in the discussion. In a real-time chat, everything is kind of localized to a specific time zone. So if like people in the US wake up and they write something, the other people on the other end, like in Europe or Asia, they have no way to interact with them. They can read up on it, like on a stream of chat logs, but it's not possible to have a meaningful, deep discussion. And there is better search engine discoverability. Like the most important questions we have on ReScript, they point to our forum, to some, I don't know, 1-year-old post, and people can still participate in that. That's something. It's like mailing lists. They're also super useful. Real-time chat is not a replacement for this kind of format. You need this kind of format if you have a small community. Make sure to centralize that. It's also very useful to have some metrics on the community health. Discourse does a very great job giving you the tools to moderate it and give you some tips on how to grow it. It's a really, really nice extension of your documentation if you have people involved in the community and write about topics. On the contribution side, our community is still small, but we have one place to update all the docs, so this is great. People understand that. They know where to submit a PR to. We have lots of contributions from newcomers, actually, which is great. That means it works. And our CI deployment preview stuff is super useful. Kudos to Vercel and Next to make this so nice. And we have some pretty great feedback loops for mentoring. So I had like a few people who are constantly pushing content. They are getting better and better and better with every pull request I review. And I'm always at a point that I'm like, okay, I see this person made a PR. I just merge it. I know it's good. I just read through it and I was like, okay, perfect. And this is great. This is really great to have people growing with you and just taking the advice. To wrap it up, we are still not there yet. There's still tons of things to do. Writing docs takes time and thought. It's like writing a book. You need to really think about the content and how to structure it, and it's also scary. And if you go to our website, you will probably notice that there's a lot of stuff missing, but we are happy for any contributions. Content design, tooling, doesn't matter if you're interested in this kind of stuff. You can check out ReScript at rescriptlang.org and our documentation source code at the link below, rescript.association/rescriptlang.org. All right, so that's it. I hope you liked it, and see you around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. This was a really nice talk, and yeah, documentation and ReScript. I'm gonna keep my rock. Okay, our first question is actually from Rachel. So take it away, Rachel.
I really enjoyed hearing all about your approach to documentation, and I just want to say I really, really dig the syntax lookup tool. That's awesome. And such a clever way to give people a glossary. I bet people just have that open as a quick reference. I wonder what the metrics around that are like. But I got a couple of questions for you here. One is, how are you handling versioning for the docs? And that's something I think a lot of people forget about when they first start writing documentation. So how are you set up to handle it?
This is a very underrated topic. That's true. So what we do is we have the platform, which is called the ReScript platform. It's containing the syntax and the compiler, and also the standard library. So what we did is we made it very simple. We have a pages folder. Within there are docs, and then there's like the manual with a major version. So for instance, we have the version V8, which is version 8, major version V8. Everything that's related to this major version will be updated in this docs. And then we also got a latest folder, which contains the latest version. We usually map that to a constant string, which is, I don't know, the most current version we keep track of. And later on, when we decide we have like a versioning scheme, so next year in January, we will release version 10. Then we will copy the latest folder into version 9 as the older 9 version, and just format the new latest version and git ignore the rest. We wrote about, which basically feature freeze the documentation for this particular versions, like the older ones. And the latest one is always the most current one. People should commit new changes to that.
Cool, thanks. I think Docusaurus uses something similar, but it does allow people to go back and edit the old pages, just in case there are some typos or something and people are really into one version. This brings up another question I've got for you. Do you have a roadmap for the documentation, or do you let the community guide how the documentation grows?
I tried, like in the past, like last year or so, I started to create milestones for the documentation itself, which kind of helped, especially if you're collecting like GitHub issues and you create a milestone and people are like, oh, I can chime in here, I can chime in here. This actually helps. The problem is that doing this roadmap work is real work. And we are kind of on a tight time budget. I would like to do this more regularly, more on the GitHub side, create a milestone for Q2 of 2021, for instance, and then communicate over the forum, hey guys or folks, we have a new milestone. If you have anything you want to commit, I'm happy to help you, guide you through or whatever. But a roadmap is actually quite a good idea.
I have one more question for you, but I want to leave room for any other questions that might have come up.
I think you can go. You can go. Yep.
All right. Here we go. How important would you say it is to involve what we typically consider non-engineers in the process of kicking off a documentation project? Like you mentioned collaboration on the UI and design side of things, like information architecture, et cetera. How has this impacted your project? How important do you think it is?
I wished we had bigger focus on involving more non-technical people. We tried really hard, especially in the past with ReasonConf and such. We tried to diversify our community a lot. We gave out a lot of diversity tickets. We reached out to more UI-related communities. We tried to reach out the React community especially, even though they have nothing to do with like typed languages or whatever. But we tried to also involve other perspectives than just the code. Programming language communities tend to get really techy, and it's getting annoying for my side because people are talking about how could I express this very particular case in a type, and then they talk like days about it. And when you talk about how do you design a button, or how do you make sure that this interaction is not confusing or accessible, nobody has any clue. And it's yeah, I'm not sure how to actually tackle this problem, because either people are not interested in this like language itself, or they just want to use JavaScript only and don't care about TypeScript or whatever. They just want to create stuff, the more creative side. I don't know how to attract these people, but hopefully at some point there will be, I don't know. It's very hard.